Welcome to The Warp. I'm Jack Rita, and in this video I'm going to be talking about the variants for Cosmic Encounter, and those are the things that you get in the expansions in addition to the aliens, as well as what's in the base game in addition to everything else, which is technology. And I'm going to rank those variants, and it's going to be, which ones I think are the best, down to the ones that I think are not the best. But it is also going to be influenced in terms of the ones that I use the most. So there might be some that I think are better, but they don't necessarily get used as much. And I'll talk about why that is and all of the context around it. So let's go. We're going to start at the top and then work our way down. So I think this will probably not come as much of a surprise to anyone, but I think the number one variant in Cosmic Encounter is the reward deck. Now, there's a reward deck that first appeared in the first expansion to Cosmic Encounter, and that is Cosmic Incursion. There was a second one that came out in Cosmic Dominion, and there's a third reward deck that is part of Cosmic Odyssey. And that third one is the smallest one, but it also has a little addendum to it, which is the Ultra rewards that you can use on their own. There's a much smaller number of those, but it is designed to be mixed into the reward deck at large, and they are ultimately designed to all be combined together into one big fat reward deck that's filled with goodness. And the reason I like the reward deck, and probably the reason why a lot of people like it, is it adds a lot of really interesting and potentially very powerful cards and effects, but they are not part of the normal Cosmic deck, so they're not dealt out in hands. When you draw new hands, you're not getting any of those cards. So you're getting a trickle of those cards brought in when you are able to gain rewards, which is most commonly when you're allying with the defense. If your side wins, those allies can gain rewards, and they can draw them from the reward deck itself and or from the Cosmic deck or free ships from the Warp. So you get a lot of really interesting effects and special cards like the Kickers and the Rifts, Intimidates, special artifacts that are not part of the normal Cosmic deck, special Negotiate cards likewise, and a few other unique cards. So you're able to add a lot of really interesting pizzazz to a game of Cosmic Encounter, some of which you won't get to in one game, but they will show up in another one. So you get that interesting variety, a lot of different outcomes and experiences from one game to the next. You're not sure what you're going to get from that deck. And there's a few things in there that maybe you don't want, like negative attack cards. So there is some risk there, but it is mostly reward when you go to the reward deck. And I think that's why a lot of people like it. You get some really explosive and unique elements that can add some surprises to the game. And it doesn't mess with your deck distribution by having them in there. So the reward deck, number one, I try to use it in every game if I can. The only time I really don't is if I've got a lot of really new players playing Cosmic for the first time, especially if they're not like really hardcore gamers like me. Going down from there, the next thing that I would say is a great variant, and I like to use all the time now, and that is the Lux variant, which finally showed up in Cosmic Odyssey. It was the Lucre variant reimagined. Now, back when Lucre was Lucre, we did not use it very much, especially in the Eon days. I loved the idea. We were so excited to play with Lucre the first few times, but it was a little bit flat. And so we ended up not using that much. When we shifted over to the Mayfair edition, they made some improvements, and they made it a little bit better in many ways. And so we had a little uptick in our usage of it, but then it kind of tapered off because we really didn't think it was a great and vital element to it. So I really like how Lux has turned out, because I think it makes it much more interesting how you get the Lux. You're able to start using it right away, but probably the biggest reason is because you can use Lux for rewards. And I will, if I'm using Lux, I am also using the reward deck. So that is in the game, and it's giving players more opportunities to get into that. Now that is going to be a game where you have access to rewards much more often, and you're going to have a lot more of them. So that is the kind of game you're going to get by combining those two variants, which is what I like. So that is that's music to my ears. But for some people, they're like, oh, there's too much craziness going on. But that is one of the reasons why I converted all of the reward cards from Cosmic Odyssey into what I call Defender rewards. And they have a different card back. And so that's just my set and what I use in Tabletop Simulator as well. And the restrictions on those, if that is the top card of the reward deck, the only way you can draw it is if you are gaining quote-unquote Defender rewards. And that is almost certainly limited to being a defensive ally in a successful encounter. Now, there are a few aliens and effects that specify Defender rewards. So from Cosmic Incursion, you have the aliens Mercenary and Ghoul, and their sheets say Defender rewards, and I allow them to draw those as per their alien power. But most, after that expansion, most references to the reward deck and to rewards were just called rewards. And so I've used that as a sticking point when I have my Defender reward deck mixed in. You can't get those unless you're actually technically getting Defender rewards. So if that top card is on the deck and you're using some other effect like Lux to gain rewards, you got to go to the Cosmic deck. And it's not bad going to the Cosmic deck. That's where you're going to find the Attack 40 and the Attack 30. It's where you're going to find all the flares. There are no flares in the reward deck, and certain other artifacts and other goodies are in there. So it's not always bad to go to the Cosmic deck. Although, again, given the choice, I am going to draw from the reward deck. So moving down to the third thing that I like best, and this is also from Cosmic Odyssey, and it's one of the newest variants to the game, and it may just be a lot right now, it's because it's shiny and new, but it is the evolutions. I really like having evolutions in the game now because I feel like it makes ship resources critical. And critical in a way that technology didn't really do. I love that technology taps into your ships as a resource. So you're like, oh, I got to put a ship from one of my colonies onto this technology, and I got to keep doing that each encounter until I can get there. But usually by like 4 or 5 encounters, which is only like 2 or 3 turns, you're done with that technology. So with evolutions, it has a much bigger impact on the game, and it's throughout the game. And so the ship resources become really critical, and I love that dynamic. So I love having evolutions in the game. And again, it's something that I could have with the reward deck quite easily. I could also have it in there with Lux. And it does make rewards, it really changes that dynamic as well, because most of the time, for most players, I would say 90% of the time, if you're getting rewards, you're going for cards. You're going for cards. You're like, ships. I'll get those ships out later. But now with evolutions in the game, your ship, there's a real drain on your ships. And if you've got a lot of ships in the warp, and in fact, in a game with evolutions, 6 ships is a lot of ships to have in the warp. And now you're like, I got to get some rewards. I got to get a couple of those ships out as well. And so I like that. It changes that dynamic because now it's not 90%. It's still probably like 70% of the time you're going there. But again, it's an effect on the normal way things go. Right on the heels of evolutions would be technology. And I kind of like having technology and evolutions in a game together. And of course, the reward deck will be in there. So now we're talking 3 variants. But the technologies, again, they're much more short-term compared to the evolutions. It's a nice effect. And what I like about the technology is it's an effect that nobody else knows about. I like that you have something secret that you are developing over the course of a few encounters until you are ready to unleash it. And so I like that surprise element in Cosmic Encounter. It's an X factor that I really appreciate and I like having in there, which is why I've always liked technology. And the new technologies in Odyssey, I think, add a lot of interesting dimensions to improve technology overall. The fact that you can trade technology now, I think, is great in deals. A lot of the new techs have a concept that I call tech refresh. It doesn't say that on there, but it did when we were developing it. And it just means that when you complete that tech, you immediately draw another one. In the old rules, the only way to get new tech was to give up your second encounter, which most players were just not going to do. And you can still do that. So every once in a while, you're in a situation where you don't want to play your last encounter card. So you say, you know what, instead of just ending my turn after one encounter, why not get some more techs and you might get an interesting surprise that you can unleash in a few encounters by researching it. A lot of the new tech too, you're able to complete researching it much quicker than the original tech, and for various reasons, either because it's to do Militech, which you don't even use ships, you're using attack cards to research it. The HazTech, which you don't finish them, but you put ships on there to research it, and then when a hazard warning comes up in Destiny, you can decide to reveal a tech, and its effect scales depending on how many of your ships are on it. Those ships are going to go to the warp, so there's a little bit of trade-off. And of course, if you are using evolutions in a game with those techs, you're going to have a ship resource problem. But I like that in there because some of those effects are pretty powerful from the HazTech. So it is a decent trade-off, I think, to sacrifice 2 or 3 ships or more if you can afford it and you really want to have some big impact with that specific effect. So after that, the next variant that I think is worth it is Moons, again from Cosmic Odyssey. Now, Moons is a variant that has existed in the previous editions of Cosmic Encounter. I loved the idea of Moons, again, in the Eon edition, but the implementation was only fair. I thought Mayfair did a much, much better job with it, having the effects on the moon, having the thicker card stock, having the categorization. That was the big thing, so that we could say, yeah, we don't want to use the full moons or the cheesy moons. We just want to use the half moons and quarter moons. And we got to the point where we used moons almost all the time during the Mayfair days. And in fact, we made moons a requirement. So it wasn't just get to 5 foreign colonies. You also had to occupy at least 1 moon. And we'd play around with that. Sometimes it was more than 1. Sometimes it was at least 1, but it couldn't be in your own system or whatever. But moon rules were slightly different back then. You were basically giving up an encounter to advance your score in order to attack a moon. And that's why we made the occupation of a moon a mandatory element. But now that's not an issue because with the moon rules from Odyssey, if you're attacking a planet that has a moon, you're attacking the moon as well, more or less. If there's nobody on it, you're going to be able to land on that moon if you win as the offense. And you'll be able to occupy that moon if you win as the defense and you have ships on that targeted planet. So I like the moons. There's 88 different moons, and that's the biggest reason why I like it. Also, the nostalgia factor. I loved having moons in the game, and I think the implementation from Odyssey is an improvement on the old moon rules, and every criticism that anybody ever had on them, we tried to address it. So I think there's a lot in there. I like moons more than space stations, and the reason for that is because control of space stations doesn't really change hands. If I have a space station on my central planet and you attack it and you win that encounter and I'm gone, you don't get my space station. I just don't get it either. It's turned off. Now, if I get a colony back there by either attacking you or we make a deal and I get to recolonize that planet, now I've got the space station again. But with moons, if I attack a planet and I've got that moon and I've occupied it there, the offense, if the defense, the system owner there attacks me and wins that, they take that moon away. In fact, if I lose that encounter, my ship on the moon goes away anyway, and they can say, yeah, I want to divert it. Plus, you've got that added element of like, if I attack you on your planet where you have a moon, and you win the encounter, you get to occupy that moon. So you don't actually start out with its effect either, but you can gain it by defending it. And it makes those planets much more interesting targets. There's a little more thought that goes into where are you going to go. And it can have an effect on the alliances as well. So, and that's a difference with space stations. So if I'm the offense and I'm targeting the central planet in Red System where they have a space station, the other players, they're not necessarily incentivized to help the defense. If anything, they are more incentivized to help the offense so that they can take away that effect from the defense. But having more players on the offense is an existing issue. I don't know this is necessarily a problem, but it's something that people complain about. Too many people on offense. Now we all have 4 colonies. And so that's a situation that some players don't want to get themselves into. And with space stations, it doesn't make that any better. In fact, it makes it worse. But the opposite can be true with moons. So if I attack that same central planet and it has a moon on it, anybody who's helping me is not only helping me get a foreign colony, which of course they'll get a foreign colony too, but I'll also get that moon effect, which they will not get. So you might be incentivized to help the defense to prevent me from getting yet another powerful effect, depending on what that moon is. And in some cases, with a moon type. So let's say that it's a moon base. I'm going to be getting 2 foreign colonies if you help me attack that planet. So again, this is going to have an effect on the normal dynamics of how encounters typically play out. And that's why I like moons a lot, and why I think moons are slightly better than space stations, but also distinctly different from space stations. I know some people are like, oh, space stations, that was basically moons, right? Why did they add moons when you already had it? But they are not the same, and that's the main reason why. Now, with the additional types of space stations that we added in Odyssey, you have the sky cities, and those do not behave like a normal space station. In fact, everybody with a colony that has a sky city will get the effect of the sky city. So in that way, it's even more powerful and potentially better than a moon. There are only 8 sky cities. So in an 8-player game, everybody can have one, but you've got, so many more, 10 times as many, 11 times as many. Math is not my best area. You have a lot more moons, so there's a lot more effects. And you do have that categorization that we took a page from the Mayfair implementation. So you've got all the different types you can see, but you also have the added benefit of a big section of those moons are what are called new moons, which means you don't know what type they are until they have been revealed. Now, the system owner, of course, can always look at their moon, so they'll know what the effects are and the type. But the other players won't know if you're using the new moons. And you can mix and match. You can say, all right, we've got a certain number of new moons in there, and then we have other moons where we can tell, all right, this is a half moon, and this is a quarter moon, and this is a full moon, and that's a blue moon, et cetera, et cetera. So I like that. You can really cater how you want to do the game. You can say everybody's going to be dealt 1 blue moon and 1 full moon, and that's what you're going to have. Or you can say we're all only going to use the cheesy moons. Or you can say we're using everything but the cheesy moons. However you want it. We have armed players to make it the kind of game that they want it to be. So that's really why I like moons, why I think they're really good. And I do like to have them in there. I like having moons with several other variants as well. I think they work with just about all of them, including space stations. Space stations are next after moons. I like space stations. I know that I've kind of thrown them under the bus a little bit, but I love them. I think they're great. I love that they were added to Cosmic Encounter. They are one of the truly original things that has been brought to the Fantasy Flight edition. So I appreciate it. It's why I think Cosmic Storm is definitely worth getting. I like having those space stations, and I do like to mix and match them with the moons. So you've got 3 planets in a game, 2 with moons and 1 with a space station. I think it makes for a really interesting game of Cosmic. So if I'm using space stations, I'm often also using moons at the same time, because I like having those extra things into the game. Some people are like, oh, there's too much to keep track of. And you know what, fine, cut it down, just use 1 variant, and that's fine for you. So I like having those space stations in there, and I like the idea of dealing out 1 of each type. So space station, a deep space station, and a sky city. And sometimes I'm like, you're going to have all 3. So everyone's going to get a space station on 1 planet, a sky city, another one, and a deep space station out in front of their system. They each have different rules for how they behave, but they're all very easy to understand and straightforward. And it's just some extra interesting and unique effects that you can bring to the game. So I like having those in there. After space stations, for me, I think it would be hazards. So I like hazards. They're basically an event deck. I think that there's probably too many what some people might consider annoying hazards in the original Cosmic Conflict set of hazards. There's a couple. I mean, certainly it just depends on your play style. But if you've got a hazard that's destroying planets, that's going to be a crazy time for you. And you've got the one that changes play direction. Some people will definitely find that annoying. I like the ones that reverse the rewards. I like some of the other ones as well, but I also love the stuff that is added in Cosmic Odyssey. Not to toot that horn too much, but I do like that expansion. And even though I designed it, I still think I'm fairly objective about it, but you tell me. But I tried to add in some other things to that hazard deck to make it more enjoyable and easier for people to implement and have a more positive experience with them. So there's not so much of like, oh, guess what? Here's a random terrible thing that happens to you that you have no agency over. I tried to be like, here's a random thing that could happen to you depending on what you do. At least you have some agency about it. So I like having them in there. I think it's a pretty low impact thing to have in the game because even with the normal hazard rules, you're only getting them when you draw a hazard warning. So it's not very much. In a normal game, you might only see like 4 hazards the whole game. So a lot of times I'm happy to throw that in there as an additional variant. So it being so low on the list, I don't want you to get the impression that I don't like it. I definitely do. I love hazards. I think it's great. From the first time I saw the idea, I went out and made my own hazard deck and use it a lot. So I like the combined hazard deck, especially with the alt hazards, which give you an alternative to having a normal encounter. It lets you basically regroup figuratively and maybe improve your situation going forward. Whereas you might be like, all I've got is an attack 4 and a negotiate, and Destiny's going to make me go after somebody that I don't think is going to want to make a deal. So do I really want to lose a ship and maybe give somebody rewards if they help out the other player? With the all hazard, you've got some recourse there and maybe give you a real improvement to your situation. So they don't come up as often in there, partly because some of the people that I do play with have just had a bad experience with hazards. Or it's just not their favorite variant to throw in there. But like I said, with the combined hazard deck, I think it's much better. And again, it's real easy to add in. It's just, there's not a lot you have to think about and plan. And it does create these interesting, unique situations that you have to deal with. And, you have to try to change tactics in order to accommodate what's going on. Then we get down to the last 2 variants. They're both from Cosmic Dominion, which kind of makes me a little bit sad that my 2 least favorite variants are from the expansion that I was one of the designers for. That was going to be the ship markers and the alliance styles. And again, I don't want you to feel like I think these are not good. I think they're great, and I think they're very innovative, and I'm super happy to have them as part of my official Cosmic Encounter set. With the ship markers, it's these little tokens. You got one for each player color. You put them on one of your ships to mark it as a special ship. And the rules from Cosmic Dominion, it feels a little bit phoned in with like, here's a couple of things, and then it says, come up with your own ideas. And some people have presented a few ideas, and I've got a couple of, they're a little bit out there, but they're interesting ideas to do. I think the real magic with the ship markers is the custom flagship deck that I made based on the Bill Martinson idea that he posted on Board Game Geek for flagships. And so I tend to use, if I'm using the ship markers, I'm using the flagship cards. And I do use those a fair amount. I like, and I even have them as a custom age card that I've made for the Cosmic campaign. And sometimes we just use the age cards to say, what kind of game are we playing and what variants are we going to play? We just draw that and we just do what it says. So I like having them in there. I think the flagships add a lot of really interesting stuff. I'd love to see a deck of flagship promos from Fantasy Flight where they can say, great, if you've got this expansion, go get Cosmic Dominion. If you don't, you get your ship markers, one for each player color, and these cards will go with it. It would be real simple to add in there. And there's a few different implementations of flagships. So there's a couple of ways they could go. They could even do a mix and match where they use my take on it or some of the other homebrew designers who've come up with ideas for the flagships. And then with the alliance styles, I think for me, the reason I don't use the alliance styles is that they're just a tiny bit too small for my stubby fingers. So I have a harder time with them. I'd love to have bigger ones. And if I did have a larger alliance dials, we would definitely use them a lot more because I think it's a really interesting dynamic. Although I got to say, I love the whole idea of having to go in player order when you're making your alliances, but usually what happens is you get everybody's going on the offense. So, unless you've got some real incentive like the reward deck or something else that might affect that, people are still more likely to join the offense, especially when they see the first couple of people allying with the offense. So people who are like, oh, I was going to join the defense, but there's no way now. There's already 12 ships over there. With the alliance styles, you do have that dynamic that is affected by it. So I like having them in the game. I've made a custom set, but they have the opposite problem. They're a little bit flimsy, so I don't really use those as well. So until a good homemade version is at my disposal, where we can use those. And one of the reasons I really love them is I love the Foreign Aid variant. But now you've got that as its own thing that doesn't need the alliance styles that's explained in the Cosmic Odyssey. So I like to have it in there, but there's no physical reminder of the Foreign Aid variant. And you had that on the alliance dial, so it was a nice way, and we tended to get used a lot more when we used the dials, because I think it's a really cool variant. It didn't require the dials, which is why I added it to Odyssey as a rules, as a variant that you can use. But again, you've got no way to remind players to do it, so they tend to just forget about it because that's not a normal thing you do in Cosmic Encounter. So there you have it. We go from the top to the bottom. You've got the reward deck, got to have that in there. And I've got the super combo reward deck with the ultra rewards. I think probably going to always have them all in there. You got Lux, especially with the reward decks in there as well. Evolutions, and then Tech. Then you got moons and space stations. Then you got hazards, and then finally your ship markers and your alliance styles. So that's how I've ranked them. I think everybody should definitely have all the expansions, so they've got all of the variants, especially with the Odyssey that adds to just about every of the variants in there. I think it enhances it, and they are designed to be combined with the existing ones for a better overall set of whatever it is you're talking about. But yeah, I think if you have done a Cosmic campaign, one of the things that I like about the campaign is that it forces you, or at least tells you, which variant to use, and you're getting a nice showcase of a couple of different variants in a campaign. I think it's a great way. A lot of players are just like, oh, we never think about what to use, or we start playing and then we're like, oh yeah, should we have added this in there? And then they were hemming and hawing about that. And the great thing about the campaign is just like, no, you're using Tech, so suck it up and get in there and do it. And then you're like, oh, this was good. We really enjoyed Tech. We should use this more. And then, we forget to do it. But I like that in there. That's one of the reasons why we just use it as a way to like, all right, we're just going to play one game tonight. It's not a campaign, but let's draw here. We'll do some alien selection, and we'll have a variant that is recommended to us. So it's just a fun way to shake things up. I had actually had a set of cards like that back in the Mayfair day, and it was just, all right, what variant are we using, and how are we going to play it? What are the special rules we were going to, add in there? So I like that now there's a canon element that basically serves that purpose with the age card. So even if you're not doing the campaign, you can use those cards to decide how you want to play Cosmic. Let me know what your favorite variant is, especially if it's not reward deck. If you don't love the reward deck, what is wrong with you? But let me know. Would want to hear about it. And if it's one of the other ones, let me know what you love about that variant, why you like to use it, why does your group like one variant, or why do they not like a particular variant, and whether or not the elements from Cosmic Odyssey might address a reason why they didn't like it. That was my hope. I certainly looked at all the different things that were criticized about the different variants when looking at how to add more stuff to it. So we feel like we did a pretty good job, but let us know. We certainly want to hear. That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.